These are the Epos M12.2 speakers, and they are some of the better speakers that you can find on the used market today. They're high quality and high performance, and even though they came out in 2005, 14 years ago at this point, they're still extremely excellent performers dollar for dollar. I bought these speakers secondhand from an online seller in 2017, after originally hearing them in a small shop in Toronto in 2005. Now let's talk for a moment about the history of these speakers. The Epos M12.2 traces its origins back to the original Epos ES11, designed in 1990 by Robin Marshall. Robin Marshall was previously of Monitor Audio and famous for its R-series speakers. He later branched out to form his own company, and he introduced the Epos ES14, designed in the early 80s and sold until the mid-90s. The 12.2 is the fourth incarnation in this series, starting with the ES11, the ES12, then the M12, and finally the M12.2. It later went on to become the M12i, which is also when production switched from the UK over to China. The M series was then replaced by the Epic and Elan series speakers, and finally the K series, which is their current line and a very different design than previous models. Let's move on to the specs and features of these speakers. The M12.2 is fairly small, but is quite hefty for its size, weighing in at 8 kilograms or 17.6 pounds, and standing at 37.5 centimeters or 15 inches tall, by 20 centimeters or 8 inches wide, and by 25 centimeters or 10 inches deep. It was finished in real wood veneer, available in light cherry, dark cherry, like this pair, or black ash. The grills are perforated metal, keeping the drivers nice and safe, and are sort of a gunmetal brown in color, which is fairly attractive in my opinion. Of course, they're removable if you prefer the look of your speakers without them. Underneath the grills, we find a two-way speaker using a 150 millimeter woofer with a phase plug, and a 25 millimeter aluminum dome tweeter, which uses ferrofluid cooling and a neodymium magnet system. The speakers are also shielded, protecting all nearby equipment. On the backside is a 1.5-inch port and two pairs of high-quality binding posts, in the event you want to try bi-wiring or bi-amping. They have 120 watts power handling with a rated frequency response of 54 Hz to 20 kHz. Having an 8 ohm nominal rating with a sensitivity of 87 decibels at 1 watt per meter, they can be paired with amps ranging from 25 to 150 watts per channel. These speakers are said to perform their best on their open frame stands, the ST12s, and I can attest to the fact that flat-topped dual pillar stands that I tried reduced bass and added a certain boxiness to their sound quality by comparison to when using their own open frame stands. There's no crossover in these speakers. Instead, the bass unit rolls off naturally, and there's only a single capacitor on the tweeter. This type of configuration usually contributes to a very good coherence between drivers, as well as good transparency and pace, rhythm, and timing. Next, I'll talk about the performance of the 12.2s. Due to their limited size, these speakers are designed for use in smaller to medium-sized rooms. Having said that, paired with a quality subwoofer, they would be able to nicely fill a larger room if so desired. More on that later though. The 12.2s are what I would call neutral sounding speakers, not adding any color of their own to the sound, and are revealing enough to show differences among a variety of ancillary gear. I could hear distinct differences when using a variety of 4 amplifiers I currently have in my home. They definitely lean toward an analytical sound rather than a romantic or euphonic sound, but are not analytical to a fault. Any errors in sound are errors of omission as far as I can tell without using any sort of measuring tools to back up this statement. They produce a fast, toe-tapping sound with great pace, rhythm, and timing. Although they're rated to go down to 54 Hz, I find they produced usable bass down to about 40 Hz or so in my room. And speaking of bass, one of the caveats of these speakers is that they're best positioned well away from room boundaries. With the rear-facing port, they have the potential to sound boomy if placed too close to the wall. Port bungs may be useful if close wall proximity is absolutely necessary. Their bass is tight and punchy, and I would venture to guess more than adequate in a small to medium room without the need of a subwoofer. In my particular case, my room is slightly too large for them, and so they take on a bit of thinness at times, and would benefit from the use of a sub. But because of their excellent sound quality, a good quality and likely quite costly subwoofer would be required if it were to keep up with them. Some people may think the M12.2 sounds somewhat bright, but in my opinion, that's not really so. I would describe them as uncolored and revealing of the source and amplification. With my Luxman LV117, they sounded very controlled, but also kind of cold and maybe lacking in a bit of emotion. Some would like this great sense of accuracy. Others might call it bright or sharp. My Exposure 2010 integrated takes away the brightness and makes the sound a bit more robust in the mid-range, if maybe a bit more opaque. My Sugden A48B provides a more 3D soundstage than either of them, with performers having a more palpable feel to their presence. My vintage Sansui AU666 sounds very similar to the Sugden, but with less 3D effect, less bass control, particularly at moderate to high volume, and has a bit more bite in the treble. In my opinion, they sound their best with the Sugden, but are most often used with the Exposure because it has a remote control. Assuming they're properly set up and a well-matched amp is used, the 12.2s provide excellent imaging and great sound placement, great width, great depth, and very good focus. They can produce a nice 3D effect and offer a big sound that belies their diminutive size. They can play very loudly before any breakup, and they don't suffer from any port chuffing when doing so. The bass packs a good punch and rolls off smoothly without a hump, given proper position, that is. Bass can get a bit uncontrolled without enough power, or if too close to room boundaries, and again, it's less defined and somewhat more boxy on flat top pillar stands as opposed to their open framed stands. Besides being able to play very loudly, I've also noted that these speakers sound good at low volumes, keeping all the musical emotion intact, but just on a much quieter scale. They sound excellent with high quality recordings, ringing the most from them, just shy of top flight, much more expensive offerings. With that said, although they sound good with a wide variety of music, they can pick apart bad recordings. The phase plug helps guide sound waves to break up any destructive wave interaction at the driver, which helps them to deliver their excellent focus. Their soundstage isn't forward, nor is it laid back. It rests somewhere in the middle. Vocals sound very neutral, with good air and a solid 3D presence, but as mentioned, the amplifier plays a significant role in this. Bass could do with some augmentation from a subwoofer, but as stated earlier, would have to be high quality in order to keep up with the Epos. I often find it helpful when people who review speakers make comparisons with other speakers, in order to give a little bit of context to the description of their sound. In direct comparison to my Rega Ara speakers from 1997, which are great on vocals, clear, bouncy, and fun, the 12.2s are much more robust and refined, but they do have the advantages of a larger, heavier cabinet and a larger main driver. In comparison to my Monitor Audio Silver 5 Eyes from 1999, they produce a more refined mid-range with noticeably greater 3D effect and more pinpoint imaging. The Monitor Audios have a much more upfront soundstage, so vocals are fairly in your face, and certainly huge by comparison to the Epos, whereupon singers seem physically larger when listening to the Monitor Audios compared to the Epos. The Monitor Audios go lower in bass than the Epos, but that's to be expected due to the larger cabinet and extra driver. In comparison to Epos's own ES14 Mark I, the Mark I is more refined overall, but somewhat rolled off by comparison to the M12.2s, which are brighter and seem to extract more detail. The 12.2s are punchier in the bass than the ES14s, but perhaps the ES14s are more accurate in the upper bass, though less exciting in this regard. In the lower bass, before the M12.2s roll off, they seem to be tighter and more controlled than the ES14s, which, although go lower in bass, have a tendency to sound somewhat rounded in the bottom end. I personally don't mind that trait of the ES14s, but this video is about the M12.2s. And although the M12.2s sound coherent, there seems to be a greater degree of seamlessness between the drivers in the ES14 by comparison. The M12.2 speakers are not quite on par with the best of the best, but they do approach 90% of what the best have to offer, and they're a real bargain on the used market today. I'm now going to give these speakers a rating out of 10, with criteria broken down into 4 categories, and then calculating their average. Number 1, looks. The real wood veneer is nice and the finish is of high quality, but the open frame stands seem a bit outdated, although there is a comeback of all things vintage. But they get a 7.5 out of 10, with half a point off because of the stands. Number 2, build quality. The cabinets are thick-walled and heavy and come in nice veneer finishes, and the drivers are very solid with big magnets, and so they get an 8 out of 10. Number 3, ease of use. The 12.2s can sound boomy with bad placement, and bland, harsh, and or out of control with the wrong amplification, and for ease of use, they get a 7 out of 10. And number 4, performance. The 12.2s are overachievers with great mid-range and good bass and treble. They sound good with a wide variety of gear, and are just a few steps shy of the best, and so for performance they get an 8.5 out of 10, and that's taking into account their current going price. The bottom line is, with an overall score of 31 out of 40, the Epos M12.2 get an overall rating of 7.75 out of 10. All of their positive qualities make for a fun and exciting set of speakers, and they're an absolute steal at current used market prices.